Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of Childcare After Hours. Today in particular is a part of my Sunday series in which we talk. Which is kind of what the podcast essentially is for too. But today we are talking about bias. Bias in the preschool classroom. Bias when it comes from the views of the teacher, when it comes from the views of a leader or an administrator. We're going to dig into all of that because I have so many thoughts and I'm pretty sure y'all do too. I have all my notes. So I kind of want to go into it first with giving you guys a description, right? And overall, just a definition of what it means. So implicit bias means that it is subtle, often subconscious stereotypes. Bias in general means prejudice or in favor of or against one thing, one person, or one group in comparison to another. Okay. How does that relate to preschool, right? Not gonna lie. I had no idea. It's like I knew bias was a thing without knowing it was a thing, if that makes sense. I never had a word to put to bias. In regards to definition, I just knew I have either felt or observed someone have bias when it came to preschool. So my first introduction to bias was during a class training, excuse me, which is a form of an assessment if you haven't heard of class. Um, Teachers can absolutely have bias. Everybody, in fact, as a person, you have a particular bias on something or another. You might not even realize it. But in reference to preschool, that was my very first time kind of hearing the connection. And I love the way the teacher actually described it from her own personal point of view of bias when she experienced going to assess a classroom and she had a preconceived notion in her mind of how a preschool teacher, because I believe it was a pre-K classroom, of how a preschool teacher should be in interactions with the students and the environment in the classroom. She felt like they should be jolly, happy, jumping around, singing, la la la, and this overly happy person, which I really don't think is many of us out there who are just genuinely that happy in the morning. But she had this preconceived notion that that is how a preschool teacher, a functional good one, right, in her mind should look like. And she observed the complete opposite. But in the same sense, the teacher did absolutely everything she was supposed to do and met the needs of those kids. So she had to kind of check her bias to make sure that her bias was not allowing her to deviate from the actual factual things that she is seeing and making sure that she is not including her own opinion or her own thoughts, excuse me, in the process of the observation. So that was my first interaction with bias. My second one is when I went to the conference for 0 to 3 in Long Beach, California, this past year. And y'all, I went to a session of a professor and his intern, and they're from Seattle, and they went deep into like a deep dive of implicit bias in a preschool classroom. And that's kind of something I wanted to share with you guys because it was so good and it's a whole thing and you probably wouldn't even realize it's a whole thing, but it's a whole thing. And it made me go into context of challenging behaviors. Like if you are in a childcare on a day-to-day basis and you ask a teacher, hey, what is one thing that you would love to receive more help on or understanding? 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you, I need more help in classroom management, or I have a kid that does X, Y, and Z, and I can't get them to calm down or to listen or to sit or to stop when I tell them to. So classroom management and managing classroom behaviors is probably going to be in the top 3. with that being said, um, understanding implicit bias and hearing real life studies of how it definitely applies to the classroom is what put me in the thought of classroom management. And it was like, hey, this is a conversation that needs to be had everywhere. So I want to share it with you. And I'm also going to share the link to the study in which it came from, which was believe it was the Yale study for, hold on, I want to make sure I tell y'all correctly. It was at the Yale Child Study Center. Okay. But I'm gonna include the link in which the platform where they shared all the details for it. So you can watch it for yourself. It's about 4 minutes, not long. It's definitely worth the listen. But let's go into it a little bit. So they did a trial with about 135 teachers, pre-K teachers at that, okay? So they were all pre-K teachers. Essentially they were put in front of a screen and they were shown four children, a white girl, a white boy, a black boy, and a black girl. And they were asked to hit the enter key anytime they saw a behavior exhibited that looked like it may could have the potential of escalating to something else, to a challenging behavior. So with this, they had some type of special technology that could track the concentration of their eyes and what they were focused on. And y'all, 42% were focused on the black boy, 34% was focused on the white boy, 13% focused on the white girl, and 10% was focused on the black girl. And in actuality of the video, there were no behaviors exhibited. So the majority people and their eyes went straight to the little black boy, which was 42%. Okay. So, um, that says a mouthful, right? Um, Bias. Just, there's so many underlying questions as to why did their eyes automatically drift to, the black boy and stay on there trying to see if behavior was to come about. And it made me step back and say, hey, right? Because I've been in the shoes of a teacher, but also an administrator. And it made me think, have I ever went into a classroom environment and had a biased mindset and not even knowing it? Um, and I absolutely would say that I have. And my concern is like, okay, I'm able to self reflect and think, like, okay, what could my possible biases be? And I'm able to check them, right? When you know better, you do better. But my question is, how can this be spread amongst other teachers, other educators, other leaders for them to be able to have the same opportunity to step back and learn what their biases are? Because it matters. And I'll tell you why I thought of classroom behavior and classroom management. Um, in my career, majority of the children that I have had encounters with teachers that felt like they were unable to manage them and they were unable to get them to listen. Majority of them were black males. And underneath that, I would have to say majority of them were either black males or black females. And then other underneath that, I would say other races would come next. And am I saying that every teacher that encountered with me had a bias? Absolutely not. But I think once teachers kind of receive this preconceived notion of a kid having one off day, um, a kid having one day where they just struggled, or they were not necessarily obedient, or they didn't follow the rules, they can kind of come up with this preconceived notion that this child is now a troubled child, or this child will now give me a run for my money, or this child doesn't behave well, and just based off of someone having a bad day. And I mean, like, let's be transparent, we have bad days all the time as adults. So what does that look like if you have a teacher who can acknowledge, right, that students will have bad days just like we as adults have bad days? What does that look like for students to be in an environment with a teacher who is unable to self-regulate themselves, right? How can they then lead that student to learn how to self-regulate, to learn how to work through a bad day and not be labeled a problem child? So, okay. Reeling it back a little bit here, an interesting fact that they also mention, the US Department of Education, is that little black boys um and black children in general have a 3.6 times higher suspension rate starting from pre-K. The interesting thing about that, and I want to kind of elaborate on, from the training that I went to with 0 to 3, and Dr. White talked about how one small disruption can kind of overlap and cause almost this title to be put on a child as a problem child, right? And let's not even think in the space of race. Let's think in the space of just a child in general. So you have a child who is in your circle time, who can hardly sit still. They twitch, they fidget, they have to get up. Seems like they're moving around. They can't focus in. A lot of teachers kind of go to, and this is just in my experience that I've seen, um, go to, well, they're being disobedient or they're being disruptive, right? Instead of, I notice you can't sit still. Are you okay? Do you need to go potty? Um, Noticing, hey, it seems like your hands are super busy, let's maybe find you something that's less disruptive for you to do with your hands while we conduct several time. Or just that mindset of, how can I better give this child a chance to adapt to the classroom environment that works for me and works for them. So instead of assuming they're just not listening because they don't want to listen, what do you need, right? Looking at those other factors, and then kind of picking the mirror up and checking yourself too, because as educators we have to be able to be honest and transparent with ourselves. How can I expect my class to sit and want to listen, right, if every day our routine is different, if we don't even have a set schedule when it comes to implementing our circle time? If one day is 10 minutes and then the next day is 3 minutes, routine matters, consistency matters, a schedule matters. Routine and schedule are two completely separate things. And this is something I'll talk to you guys about in my back to school training. Understanding the difference between a schedule and a routine. A schedule is essentially a block schedule that gives you an idea of things that need to be done throughout the day. A routine is something that you implement every single day. Every single day. Children who have routine can depict what comes next. Children who can depict what comes next are not, or less likely basically to be the ones to struggle, because they know what comes next. They know after nap time, oh, I'm going to eat again, and after I eat again, oh, we're going to go outside. After I go outside, I know we got to listen to the book in order for me to be able to go to the art table to paint after. Like, kids need routine and they need structure. And I know I've like completely deviated, but yes, we have to be transparent and look in ourselves. But drifting back, Looking at that student, right, who we can't get to participate at circle time, essentially, I want you guys to think about, what do you do when a child does not listen? Do you put them to the back of the class? Did you go make them sit at a table with nothing? Do you call the front office to come and get them out of your classroom? What do you do? I really want you to think about it. What do you do? Um, and once you reflect on that, I want you to go back and think, okay, this is what I've done. Now, what can I do better? What other options can I give myself and this child before I jump straight to call their parents? And this is why. So, in the video training that I watched with Dr. White, he showed us the journey of a boy, and it was animated, but it was pretty cool. A little boy in pre-K getting put out of class because the teacher said he was disruptive because he would tap, you know, and tapping, moving feet, kind of couldn't sit still, not verbally disruptive, not hitting peers, just could not sit still, which led to them calling the little boy's parents, excuse me. And from pre-K to elementary, the same thing continuing, still can't sit still, calling parents to send home, being labeled, a disruptive child, like, oh, well, who was your first grade teacher, your kindergarten teacher, your pre-K teacher, and especially if you stay in a small town, right? People talk. So it's like, oh yeah, such and such used to do this, so they're a problem child. Titles just being stuck on children, and it continued to him being in middle school and becoming the class clown, right? Because essentially, for some kids, if you become the class clown, it kind of deviates away from you taking in the lesson. You already feel like you're going to be judged and labeled already by the teacher from what they've heard from the past grades that you've been in. So it's almost like the child in this case felt like they needed to beat them to the punch. And so they're the class clown. Now they're intentionally trying to get kicked out. Went from middle school to high school to, again, that label, to now where I don't feel comfortable in my classroom. And I don't even know what's going on. Maybe not even know how to read, right? But no one knows because no one is taking the time to really get to know this child. And the only people who then really treat this child like family is the streets. And I know that's a far jump, but for some people that is definitely the truth. And I will speak from my own experience of being in high school and kind of seeing it for some people. So they tend to gravitate towards those who show them love, those who, oh, they care about me. Those teachers don't care about me, right? Um, I say all that to say we are with these students majority of the day. You guys are. I don't directly work in the classroom anymore, but you guys are with these students majority of the day. Your interactions need to be a safe space um for them. And I kind of wrote some things down I want to share, just in general, getting proactive and becoming more aware, becoming more knowledgeable, becoming in tune with the community in which you serve, right? And what does that look like? I want to break it down. So learning more about child development. Let's go back to preschool because that's where a lot of us are. Learning more about child development. If you are a teacher, I don't care if you're a lead teacher, a floater, or a teacher assistant, you need to know about basic child development. What is basic child development? If you work with kids who are 6 months to 12 months, you need to know, what are some of those milestones? What do those things look like? What is age appropriate for feedings? What is age appropriate for, bodily motor movements. You need to know those things. What can I do, right, to help push this child to their goals, their life skills, the academics? You need to know those things that are age appropriate. Um, and a lot of times that's not going to be handed to you. Some things you got to get out there and you got to learn for yourself. If you truly want to be of service to your families, some things you are going to have to outsource. Some things, I'm sorry, you are going to have to do outside your normal work hours, right? This is the difference between somebody showing up for a job and somebody truly loving what they do. Do you know about the kids that you serve in and out? In and out. Okay. Another thing, outsourcing. If it's something you don't know, if it's something your co-teacher doesn't know, if it's something your director doesn't know, find someone who knows. There is no harm in asking a multitude of questions to individuals who are only looking to see you excel and see you grow and expand your knowledge. So if you don't know, ask someone. Don't be content with saying, I don't know. That drives me crazy. Don't be content with saying, I don't know. And don't be content with information, the expectation of information to just fall into your lap. Get out there and get it. If it's something you want to know, go find the answer. Networking, social media, community events, those are things for you just to attend, right? Community events. If your community has a farmers market, if your community has a boo bash and you got a little niece or nephew, like, go be in your community, right? Those are where your families are. They want to see that. Build relationships, because I'll tell you the importance of building a relationship with your families will help alleviate the hard conversations that you have to have with them if their child bites, if their child, I'm sorry, has to get expelled for a day or so. Like, those conversations are so much easier had if you have a relationship with them, because they know you care, right? They know that ultimately this is coming from a place of love, and rules are still rules. But even in those rules, you have empathy and you still care about their child, and they know that. And they know that through relationship. Um, and building relationships with the team around you, I can't stress that enough. And holding each other accountable. So, how we're talking about bias, if you recognize another teacher's bias, being able to, in a loving way, have that conversation with them and be like, hey, I noticed X, Y, and Z. Why don't you try this? Or I noticed X, Y, and Z. I don't know if you did, but hey, school each other. Y'all have to really take the time to build up one another, school each other, because at the end of the day, it is you guys that are in the back on the front line working side by side to take care of these precious little babies at their most fragile state. So if you see bias, say something in a loving way. It does not have to be in a you know it all way, in a loving way, right? In a loving way. Becoming aware, understanding the family dynamics that you serve. Who are your families? Do you have children in your room that have come from different cultures? Are you being respectful of them? You may not know all it is that comes with the culture, but maybe leaving that space with those families to say, hey, what kind of culture history do you have that we could share with the classroom, depending on the age of the kids? Bringing a little bit of their culture into the classroom. If it's something that they may wear, or they may say, or they may do that you don't understand, being transparent to say, hey, I'm not sure what this means. Could you educate me on it? Um, but most of all, being respectful. At the end of the day, even if you're not aware of everybody's cultural traditions, if you can be respectful to them, um, that's the utmost important thing you can do, right? You can do no wrong with being respectful and being honest. Okay. And essentially, when you are just building relationships with families, You're building relationships with their students. And when you build relationships with students, you're creating a trusting, dependable, safe space for that child. So, the child who at home may not get the attention, that they truly need, that may come to your classroom and act out, that you may then allow your bias to say, well, they're a trouble child or they don't listen and X, Y, and Z, which in reality, they just need love, affection, attention, a hug. Take the step back to look at your challenging behaviors and say, look at it from another lens. What else could be going on here? Did something change at home? How can I better help and better serve? Because simply having this child either expelled from the school or kicked out of your classroom, if they're not causing immediate bodily harm to students and you, is not going to help them grow. Essentially, you have just said, I don't want to do it. You let somebody else do it. What about the child? They're here to learn not just academics, but life skills. How to share, how to listen, how to wait, how to respond, how to be kind. It is our job as an educator to be that person, and we cannot be that person if we have bias. We can't. We can't. So I hope y'all loved this episode. I want you to drop all your comments below. I want to discuss this further. If you have experience, if you recognize your own bias and you want to share, please share and drop it down below.